So, Berto, this whole week, I thought we would just have episodes of you and me answering emails and maybe doing some fun things at the end. What do you say?
That sounds fun. I'm in.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I collect chocolate bar cards called Jet.
So, we have been researching for our upcoming deep dive on Elon Musk, and I have been spending many, many hours because there are so many details, and it's hard to figure out what to say. At this point in the research and thinking process, I'm landing on a number of disparate conclusions, so I'm wondering where I'll land at the end. But in the interim, I thought we would just have some easier episodes to record, because once we get into our deep dive mentality and practice, it's like all that I do with my life
all over.
for a number of weeks.
Yes.
But and by the way, for people that are curious, the reason why we're doing Elon Musk is because we did a poll on Patreon, and the winners, so to speak, of the poll were the last few deep dives that we've done. Okay, so this first email is from patron Nikki from England. She says, "Please, may I request that you may kindly answer this question I have regarding racism and bigotry in loved ones. My brother uses words like retarded or the N-word even. For half of my life, I've had many conversations with him, my brother, about why this language is offensive and upsetting to many people, including me, and he will not stop using these terms. He has agreed on several occasions that he would stop, but he always goes back on it and insists he will use whatever word he wants. Politics and getting angry has been a hobby for him for a long time. As time goes on, he becomes more indoctrinated into the far-right extremist group that says things like, 'Don't be a snowflake, it's hot outside.' Is there anything you could imagine me saying that might change his mind and get him to stop using these definitionally offensive words?" Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a very common thing, I think, for people. I know I myself used to use words for a lot of my life that turns out were offensive. And either I didn't know it at the time, and sometimes even after I sort of knew it, I would still defiantly be like, well, I'm still going to do it because who cares?
Well, what was it? Was it who cares, or what was it really?
No, in some cases it was who cares. Like because I was, without the right-wing ideology, it was like, well, I've been using this all my life. Like, why do I need to change now? This is dumb. Like, I know what I mean. It shouldn't offend someone.
Yeah, meaning that you would use a word that was like these words, but you would think, well, that's not really what I mean. I'm not making fun of those people. This is just the word that we happen to use.
Right. And by the way, I do think there are limits to how much I think we should censor language, but I also think there's a difference when there is a word that categorically insults a group of people, and it historically does so. And either we just through ignorance, or just because when I was young, I categorically insulted groups of people, and it was just like the default culture I was living in. And then, as like when I grew up in the 80s. In the 80s, it was it was totally permissible and kind of expected that you would make fun of gay people. It was in all the movies, it was in all the shows, and it was just like jokes at the expense of like someone being gay was the norm. And there were, slang terms around that you would call each other, and you wouldn't really mean it, I guess. Like, you wouldn't literally mean like you are a gay person, but you would still use those terms. The R word, I absolutely use that. I mean, granted, not in Colombia because we didn't use the English word, but when I was here, I used it, and it definitely wasn't used as like, hey, you are literally one of these group of people that are differently abled mentally or whatever. No, it was just an insult to your friends or whatever. However, I defiantly used that for many years, and I was still like, oh, I don't know, I've been using that all my life. And then there were other terms that I guess I didn't grow up in this country when it came to grade school. I came here for high school. So one of the things that, I didn't grow up around many different races. Like I grew up around Hispanics in Bogota, mostly. When I was in New York for a bit, for like 2 years when I was 5, I was exposed to more races, but not too much. So I didn't have really a lot of context when it came to the racism in this country and worldwide, of course, but against blacks and the history of slavery and all these things. I knew about it kind of like at a high level, but I didn't really know. So the N-word was something that I didn't use liberally, but I heard it in all the songs, and I considered myself a person of color. So I remember one time I arrived at a bar, and I was like in my 20s, and there's a group of people there, and I was like, "What's up, my N-words?" And everyone was like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just a fun and crazy guy. What's up?" And then someone pulled me aside like, "Dude, you can't say that." I'm like, "Why not? Like everyone says it." And that was the first time that I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess there's a way to, like, maybe I can't use that word." But yeah, so I've been guilty of that. I think there is a difference though when you start adding like a political philosophy to it, like where essentially me not using these words means our freedoms are going away and the other side is winning. And so therefore I'm going to triple down on all the words. And then when you, on top of that, add on real racism or real chauvinism and other things, then yeah, it gets really dicey. I don't know all the details, but it sounds like it's difficult because with the brother, the conversation isn't just, "Oh, I guess I didn't realize that. Yeah, I've just been using that word all my life." It sounds like it's more like, "No, I'm definitely going to use this word because it's the left trying to suppress me. And so I'm going to use that word. I'm going to use all these other words and take it, right? You're a snowflake." And when it gets to that point, that is way harder.
Yeah, I mean, they're indoctrinated into a cult, essentially.
Yeah.
But what could have gotten through to you
Yeah.
years before you decided to make the shift?
Yeah. Certainly personal experience, like someone actually saying, "Well, I am of that group," or "I know someone of that group," or "My brother is of that group." And that just hurts, like that kind of thing, that would have gotten through to me. Because I certainly never, as a child, I was never a mean person. So I never meant to hurt
So instead
someone.
of saying something like, "Hey, you bigot, I can't believe you're being a bigot, you bigot."
Right.
Instead it's, "Hey, that actually hurts people's feelings. I know people, including myself, I hurt for them."
Yeah.
So it's a message of pain and hurt instead of accusation and criticism.
That's right. Well, like, for example, with calling someone the R word, the thinking was like, the irrational thinking in my head, and I'm sure it was a common thing, was like, "Well, no, I'm not saying you're of that group. I'm just saying your mind is deficient," right? But then someone could have said, "Well, wait, hold on, listen. That word is a real word, and it means something. And you're by using it in a derogatory way, you're literally you're affecting this community, even if they can't hear you right now, you are doing it." I think that could have helped me, right? When it is presented as like what you were saying, an immediate, like, "You're a bad person. I can't believe you did that. You're a bad person." I think the natural reaction is to get defensive, be like, "What? I've been using that all my life."
Right, and that's why the cult of this brother exists, is because a lot of people on our side will just yell and say, "You're a bigot," and "You're an evil person, you're a racist," that kind of thing. And that immediately causes the individual, that doesn't fit with how they feel about themselves, and didn't fit with how you felt about yourself back in the day.
Right.
And what is the definition of quote unquote a racist? I mean, there's different definitions of that, but it immediately causes pain for people, and then they have to defend themselves, and they dig in and they search for an echo chamber to make themselves feel better. And then you have a brother that starts to, so the sister here emailing in, patron Nikki from England, I don't know if there's anything that she can do, because this has a life of its own. Maybe no matter what she has done or what she will do, the brother might continue to dig in just because he has been indoctrinated. But the strategy is what you're saying, Berto, is the one that I use when I'm at my best, which isn't always, which is assume that the individual has a heart and just has yet to understand it. That's what privilege is a part of privilege is that you have the privilege to not even know the experience of the oppressed because you're not oppressed. You've just never experienced that before. And when someone has never experienced it before and has never had it explained to them very well, then it's natural that they're going to think, what's wrong with you? You're making shit up. You're choosing to be upset about this. And if we give people an opportunity to understand the pain, unless they're a psychopath, which the brother probably is not, then it will tug at their heartstrings and they will change. I mean, That's how you changed, Berto. Hey, my N-words, someone didn't say racist and reject you. That might have, what do you say,
I would have dug my heels in or something.
So it might have radicalized you. But instead, they pulled you aside and were serious about it, sounds like from their tone, but also gave you the benefit of the doubt that you just didn't know, and told you that it hurts.
Right.
And you were like, oh, well, I didn't know that, Right. I'm just a foreigner from Colombia.
I'm a mostly white Spaniard that I didn't know at the time, pretending that I'm totally entitled to use whatever words.
Yeah, you say you didn't know because you hadn't done DNA.
I hadn't done
analysis.
DNA. So in my mind's eye, I always thought of myself as like 70% like native South American, which is still not the same group, but whatever. Like I just kind of felt entitled, I'm like, whatever, I can say this. Plus it was like a cultural thing. Like I hear it in songs all the time. So I'm just regurgitating what I hear.
Well, and in certain circles, there are white guys or non-black guys who will say back then that phrase, and I think even today, and have it not be received as offensive in that circle, Yeah. But what is your percentage of conquistador?
It's like I'm something like 70% Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah.
Conquistador.
Yeah, white Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah, my
colonizer.
Okay, so there's one word that this has been more recent. It's not like I use it regularly, but I've opposed the change, and it's lame, because I didn't even think about it, right? To me, that word had only a meaning related to whatever it is I'm describing,
meaning that with other words that we've talked about, while using them in what you believe to be a non-harmful way, you were aware that it could be used in a harmful way, whereas very few people will use the word lame in the way that it's intended, right? Unless you're talking about like a horse, but even then, you and I don't live around horses, don't hang out with horses very much.
Right.
So
that one caught me a little off guard. I was like, well, I guess that's what that means.
Was I the one?
Yes, you're the one who told me. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's the origin of that word. I didn't even think about it. And it's, one thing that all of us have some we know this. We have implicit biases, right? One of the things I noticed when I was younger, and I still do it, and then I catch myself, is when I hear someone speak with a thick accent, I automatically, part of my brain goes, oh, they're just not very smart. Even if it's my mom, like it doesn't matter who it is, there's a part of my brain that goes, oh, they're just not very smart.
Even if it's British?
No. I mean, like if it's speaking like a language that's not their first language, and therefore they have a thick accent. Like,
do you have that? Do you have that when people try to speak Spanish?
Absolutely, yeah. And so if I were speaking, look, I learned a little bit of French, I learned a little bit of Japanese. I'm sure when I try to speak those, it's nearly incomprehensible, right? So, and the people that are speaking those languages learned it. Like my mom, she knows way more grammar than I do. She is a great writer. She's really good at the language, but just she learned as an adult. So she'll always have an accent. When I was younger, maybe as a teen, maybe even into my early 20s, if I was watching a movie or I saw someone and I would hear them talk and they had a thick accent, that's where my mind went. Now, I started obviously realizing, oh, that's a really dumb way to think about it, because not only does their brain work just like mine, but they're speaking a language that's not their language. That they didn't get the advantage like I did of learning 2 languages when I was 2 automatically. They actually took the time as an adult to sit there and painfully learn a new language, and they're speaking it just fine, right? But that's not So I think it's kind of maybe a natural human reaction that as primitive humans, we hear someone speaking to us in a way that's a little different or a little troubled or a little slower, and our brain automatically goes, oh, this person's not very smart.
Right.
You know?
I think it could be a number of things. One is that also the messages that we get growing up and in the media that tell us that foreigners are stupid because the power structure needs us to believe that to justify capitalistic oppression and exploitation and othering. So it's not just a natural tendency. Because, you know, when a 3-year-old is struggling with grammar and English, it's natural to conclude that they also haven't figured out a lot of the adult things that they eventually will figure out. You know, they're not smart, they don't know things, and those things are associated.
Imagine that. It's like, oh, this little 2-year-old's just dumb. And they can't speak like a 30-year-old adult.
Yeah. You just say, well, you know, they just haven't lived. So, we might have that heuristic of if you're struggling with grammar, you must not have figured out a lot of other things.
Right.
Yet. You're still learning.
And you know, the effect that would have for me when I was a kid, because I remember this, is I remember feeling what I now realize was racism. And sometimes it was towards my same race, because I remember being in New York as a 5-year-old, and we had a lot of Hispanic friends, and some of them spoke with, including my dad, honestly, with a really thick accent. And I remember at that age I can't put it into words. It's not like I said, oh, this race is inferior, even though it's my same race. But it was more like, oh, these people are just not as good or as competent or whatever, you know. And it's so bizarre. But as a little child, I was already, if I hadn't had other signals, other inputs into my life, I would have headed down that path of, because like you're saying, the culture reinforced it. Whenever you watched a movie and there was someone with a thick accent, they were the butt of the joke. You know, I was like, oh, look at that guy. So funny. The way he talks is so funny.
Yeah. And I'm guessing it is different around the world. Like there might be countries that they have a different bias where if they hear someone speaking English, or if they hear someone speaking with an American accent in their language, they might not have that association. I mean, they very well might, right? But they might also, you know, depending on where they are in the world, and their associations and the capitalistic machine having indoctrinated them into believing that Americans are superior, they might actually have a different association, you know?
It's interesting. Like in the 80s, we had a show in Colombia that had a gringo in it. It was this actor that was supposed to be from the US. I don't know if he was, but either way, he spoke with a very thick gringo, you know, accent, but in Spanish. And he was the butt of the joke. But he was also a tall white dude. And so the butt of the joke only extended as much as like, ha, that's a funny accent. That's funny. It's so funny when he talks, he says like silly things. But and I think a lot of people talk about this when there's imbalances in cultural, like between races and cultures. It didn't go as far as like, that's why we should reject him. And that's why it's okay that he's poor. And that's because none of that other stuff applied, you know? It's like, well, he's still like, you know, this gringo probably has money, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just that it's funny how he talks.
Right.
In other cases, it's actually like, ooh, it's funny how they talk. That's why I'm not going to associate with them. Or that's why they're doing that menial job. Or that's why they're doing... And that just builds on itself. And so what I'm getting at is that over the years, I was lucky enough to have enough signals where I started learning and realizing, oh, okay, that's a dumb mental model. And similar with all these words over time. And culture changes, right? So it's also a matter of culture itself growing up, being like, okay, wait, why do we keep using this word if it denigrates this whole group of people? Can we like change what we're doing?
Yeah, and there are a number of principles. One, we've already touched on, if we're going to change our society, there's going to be a bell curve in terms of when people are given an opportunity to learn, right?
Yeah.
Like the word lame, I would guess that less than 5% of Americans are even aware that that could hurt someone's feelings. And so a lot of people have yet to even be given an opportunity to digest that. So there's that. Also, when we tell people to not come after them, as if they are inherently a bad person.
Right.
Until demonstrated otherwise, assume that the individual is a good person and has yet to learn or yet to be told or has been misinformed or something,
Yeah.
The other principle is that 10 years from now, when you listen to an old episode of Psychology in Seattle from 2015 in which Berto says the word lame, or I say the word lame, understand that at the time, nobody was talking about how that word would be harmful. And even just the concept of heavily evaluating those kinds of adjectives had yet to come around. I mean, certainly that's always been something that we have been concentrating on, particularly in psychology, but there has been particular scrutiny for a very good reason in the last 5 years, 10 years. Yeah. So that's another principle. For example, I've talked about this before, but when I grew up, I called black people black. And then in the 90s, there was this movement, and I was in graduate school, so I'm at ground zero for all these conversations. Right. And all the black people I knew, both therapists, professors, and friends, were all in agreement. Now, that's my pocket. So,
yeah.
And also all the black people I saw in the media, like Jesse Jackson, these kinds of people, they were saying to change the label to African American because they don't have black skin. That's stupid. They have brown skin, and they have various different shades of brown. And the same way that you have Asian American and Hispanic American, or why is it black people, right? It should be African American. And so it took me a while to adjust. I would say African American.
Right.
And if you listen to early episodes of Psychology in Seattle, 95% of the time, we will say African American. Then I would say about, 7 years ago or something, I started hearing black people saying African American bugged them, and they wanted to be called black.
Because it sounds like they're not really American, like they're from outside of America.
I guess. I mean, I'm Asian American, so, but language changes and preferences change. My grandma called herself Oriental,
Sure.
Anyway, so some leeway and understanding of history needs to exist. And so, I started saying black, but there was a transition period. And then I'm talking with a friend of ours, a black guy, but he's very young. Mm-hmm. And he's a great guy, and we are politically on the same page.
Yeah, very aligned.
on everything. We're just casually talking about something, and he's just like, it's just the whole African American thing. I mean, what? That's just and he was saying blanketly, like across any decade, anyone who referred, and he was basically saying that white people invented African American and were imposing it on black people. And I don't know the whole history,
And it might be, I don't know.
Maybe there was some movement around it, but that certainly wasn't my experience at all. It was the opposite. Like, no, I didn't have a single white person come up to me, you really need to call him African. It was all black. I had my professor of cultural studies at Antioch University in the mid-90s was black, and she said, use African American. Anyway, and so I was like, whoa, said.
Let me explain.
because in my head, I say the word black, but 10 years ago it was wall to wall African American, right?
Right. And you could watch an episode of yours from back then and be like, what the hell?
Yeah. And there's a chance in 20 years from now that African American will be incredibly offensive.
Sure.
And maybe for good reasons. I don't know. But you have to understand history and the movements of things, So similar to the word retarded. When I came into the field in the 90s, the word retarded was used for developmentally disabled people. And it was because other previous words for developmentally disabled or intellectual disability or retarded had been used by common people as an insult.
I see.
The word idiot, the word moron. Right. These words were not insults at the time. They were technical words that no one associated with negativity. But because people would say you idiot or you moron, and there's other words too, then they become to you and me absurd. It just seems absurd that in a clinical document, a psychiatrist would say this person is a moron, or this person has a moron disability.
Or if someone came to me now and be like, wait, did you just use the I word? What do you mean?
Yeah.
You called him an idiot.
Right.
Well, he was. You see how he used this car to almost run me over?
Right. So that's interesting. That's interesting in that. So maybe in 50 years, retarded will be so forgotten as a word that was even associated with developmentally disabled people that it will come around again as a potential word that you would say. And that's just history. Things change.
You know what's funny, though? Because that word carries with it the meaning of retardation, like something has been delayed.
Yeah, they learn more slowly.
Right. So to me, I could have never claimed in good faith, even back when I used the word all the time, or whenever I used it, I couldn't have claimed in good faith, oh, I didn't know that this had to do with mentally disabled people. Because that word, as far as I can remember as a child, I still did know that that's what, whereas idiot and moron, I never knew that association, right? So in my lifetime, I definitely had no plausible deniability. It's just that, well, I don't know, I just used that word. But if someone came to me now and said, like, idiot, don't you know that, 80 years ago, then I would legitimately be like, well, I only know that because I do a podcast.
So my conclusion is that let's change our society, and as a part of that, and kind of a minor part of it really, is the labels that we use. And if we're going to do it, the path forward is clearly through compassion and understanding and giving people the benefit of the doubt, not insulting and attacking and othering them such that they turn to a cult online and dig in, and here we are.
Totally. 100%. I have a relative who hates it when anyone uses the word sucks because of the sexual implication.
Well, not only that, but it's a gay implication.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. I just thought it was like, that sucks. No, to be honest, until that relative said that to me, that's one of those that I just like, no, that sucks. It sucks. It's terrible. It's lame, right? Like that's literally
I could be wrong, but from my memory, it was suck dick, and it was
yes,
and it was a gay insult.
I see. Okay, well, I didn't even know that. This was from a religious perspective. The person was like, oh no, you shouldn't use that word because that is sexual in nature and blah blah blah.
Yeah, and I could be wrong about that, but I thought about that, I don't know, a few months ago and thought, well, that one really snuck under the radar.
Yeah. Well, so my answer was like, oh, really? I can't use that? Well, that sucks. Massive schlongity-dong.
Because you'll hear preschool teachers in front of their preschoolers saying that sucks.
That sucks. Yeah.
It's one of the most empathetic things you can say to someone.
That blows. This is the other one. That blows.
Yeah, exactly.
Sucks.
Yeah. It's like, how are these, or in 10 years, are we going to have a reckoning with that?
And why did that become a bad thing?
Well, because again, gay, it's everything gay is bad.
I see.
I mean, to the point that you were, I think, alluding to earlier, which is that just saying something was gay was one of the funnest thing that dude bros could say. Oh, we got so gay. Like watching 40-Year-Old Virgin, there's a whole running joke between Paul Rudd and one of the Seths. I forget which Seth that guy is. The whole running joke, they're two of the guys that work with Steve Carell at that Best Buy place, and they're just like, you know how I know you're gay? Well, because D. You had grandmas going to see that movie.
Sure.
You had teenagers. You said you had gay people going to that movie, and I'm sure there were plenty of people that were deeply hurt by that.
That's crazy.
But
that was recent.
That was a mainstream, right down the middle American blockbuster.
That's right.
And I don't remember hearing a single peep about that running joke. And Paul Rudd, America's sweetheart, signing off on that kind of humor and leaning into it. I mean, it wouldn't be just 2 years later, probably, where you would never hear a joke like that.
Yeah, it was towards the trail end of that, I guess.
Yeah. And that I don't forgive them because like the word lame or African American or these kinds of things.
Yeah, but at that point they should have known better.
Everyone should have known from the very beginning. In fact, I remember when that word started to gain popularity in the 90s and early aughts. And certainly when I was a kid, people would say that, but it was under hush. People would say it rarely. It became the most common insult among particularly men and boys. And it was just a constant refrain. And I remember just thinking, what the fuck is happening? And I almost wonder if it was because of gay rights that was increasing and heterosexual men felt like they needed to signal or something. Because there's so many other available words, right? You know, think about all the other words you can use for something.
Oh, I'm straight. I'm going to use the words now.
Yeah, like there's so many other words you can say, that sucks. Or, you know how I know you suck? I mean, in the way that
yes.
They're not using it as a gay slur.
You know what's crazy in Colombia, and this is still true now, I think, I'm pretty sure. But even, when I was a kid, I was a teenager, guy friends would routinely refer to each other as marica. And that's not only the female version of the shogun marico, but in Spanish it means gay. And but you would use that with each other, and it wasn't thrown as an insult. It was like saying, yo, dude. So like we'd be like, just talking about like if we're going to go get pop at the store, like, oh, marica, almost blah, blah, blah. It'd be like me saying that now to you.
What does it mean?
It means gay man. But you would say it to each other the same way I would say, hey, dude, or hey, bud, let's go get a soda,
Well, it must have evolved to, in the beginning it was an insult, and then it became a fun way to jab at each other.
Right. And then it became... it's just the way you call each other.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, yeah. No, you're right, because and you would insult each other all the time, like, oh, you blah, 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 blah. You would just throw insults just for fun.
Yeah.
But then eventually, you're literally just tagging each other with a word that essentially might as well be dude.
Yeah.
But it happens to be a gay slur. Like.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many aspects to this. Just one other detail. I would go golfing with my friends, and some of whom today are some of the most caring, loving, socially just individuals that you will ever meet. But in the 90s and aughts, if you were putting and you didn't putt hard enough, you were short of the cup, one of the primary insults was, oh, nice one, Sally.
What? Sally?
Just to call any kind of quintessential girl name.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Meaning you missed it because you are feminine, gay, whatever.
Yeah. You're a girl and you're weak, and you should have hit it harder. And I remember thinking at the time, because being a therapist, it kind of ruins a lot of these moments, And I just remember thinking, wait, so the joke is that I'm a girl.
Right.
And that's just the punchline, that I'm a girl. Like, that's a powerful message about sexism. Like, you don't have to say I'm a bad girl.
Right.
You don't have to say I'm a girl doing a sexual act. All you have to do is say, you're a Sally.
Yeah.
And that's
enough to insult you.
That's enough to just, end of insult. You're a girl,
Mic drop.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And today, that persists. In any kind of bar tonight, there will be innumerable men that will be their primary insult to the guy who bumped into them on the way to the bathroom. It will be either you woman or you pussy or you gay thing or whatever, Yeah. And it just says we have a long ways to go. And language is a part of it, but really it's the foundation and the indoctrination into the idea of supremacy of white people and men and heterosexuals. If we dismantle that, then the insults don't make any sense, Anyway.
True.
Let's take a break. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Berto, let's do an OPP. What do you say?
OPP.
These people became patrons a long time ago, and I decided to make a list of people because they're so high in the tier list, they give so much money every month, and they've also been a high tier patron for so long. I sorted the whole list, and I know this is a little crude, but literally by how much money they have contributed to the endeavor that is psychology in Seattle.
Come on, listen to the money talk.
So I'm not going to say how much, but I will list in order the patrons who have contributed the most money. And it's, if I told you how much money it is, it's really just astounding.
It's crazy.
So the one patron who has given us the most money to keep us rolling down the podcasting path is Serenity. We met Serenity at a live event a long time ago, a number of years ago.
Serenity now.
She's from California. And number 2 is Jill from Maine. Jill from Maine. The next one is Sally from Olympia, Washington. She became a patron in 2019. And then number 4 is FPL, famous patron Lyndon.
What? FPL's in there. Oh my gosh.
Number 4.
Do you realize so him and I have this thing where he'll post these pictures on Facebook. And I always have to make some sort of comment on the pictures. A lot of times he does this thing where he posts a picture of someone that looks like someone else in a band, and he mislabels it on purpose. And then I'll reply saying, oh, no. That's totally wrong. It's this other thing, but I also mislabel it on purpose. And it's kind of a running gag between us.
Sounds like you kind of have to be there.
You had to be on Facebook.
Lyndon is from Ireland. We've met him in person as well. He's been a patron since 2015. I think he might have even suggested I sign up on Patreon.
Really?
And I had never even heard of. Someone suggested I sign up on Patreon and asked listeners if they want to become patrons. And I had never heard of Patreon. Patreon was brand new. Maybe, I think it was founded in 2014. I'm not sure.
That's incredible.
And, people will suggest things. I usually will consider it, but most of the time I don't do it because you remember when that one app came out where it was chat groups? It came out like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was all the rage for like a month.
Yeah.
A lot of people were saying, Kirk, you got to go on that thing.
Yeah.
And when I looked into it, I just thought, oh, that just doesn't sound like it's for me. Similar to TikTok, I experimented with TikTok for a few months and then just decided, I don't know, it's a lot of work. It's strangely a lot of work for very little benefit. Anyway, so when Lyndon suggested Patreon, I, was pretty close to just being like, but man, what a boon. And I didn't think anyone would sign up. But when they started that initial month, I was like, this could actually be a thing where, if people sign up on Patreon, that will pay our bills such that I can scale back on work and I can dedicate more time to the podcast and make a better, and make the podcast better. And that's literally what happened over time. Anyway, number 6 is my sister Colleen, who became a patron all the way back in 2017. And then we have Noah from Los Angeles, 2016. And then we have Kimber from Texas, Pearland, Texas, 2017. And then we have good old Akemi, who I have met and communicated with. She's from San Pedro, California, 2017. And then we have good old Ed Weil. You've probably communicated with Ed on Facebook as well, on the Facebook fan page maybe.
I'm sure I have.
He's a therapist, and he's out there in New York, 2017.
Oh, that's sweet.
And then we have Chiara from Brookline, Mass. We have Danielle from Phoenix, Arizona. We have TR from Seattle, and I've communicated with TR. We have good old Junie from Australia. Junie has her own YouTube channel.
Oh, I love her stuff. It's so good.
We got Taylor from Vancouver, Washington. Then we have Hallie Harris, who has her own podcast. And we've met her. She's from Lake Stevens. and her podcast, Someday We'll All Be Dead, is the name of the podcast. So, I just wanted to highlight those folks. Also, I want to do a little announcement that when you sign up on Patreon, if you sign up through your Apple app, if you have an iPhone, you should know that Apple basically takes a 30% commission of every in-app purchase that you make. So if you're going to be buying something with your iPhone, it's best for everybody, aside from Apple, if you use a browser or a different device.
So they get a 30% from in-app purchases.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's read an email. Patron Maria from North Carolina. She says, I know you've spoken a bit during the Love is Blind Micah and Irina videos about mean girls. So just chiming in here. So this was the Seattle version of Love is Blind, which was a year and a half ago-ish or something. And there were two young women who were labeled as mean girls. They were...
Got it.
They acted like middle schoolers. They would ridicule other
Cliquey
women.
and making fun of everyone.
Yeah. Above it all and
Right.
And arrogant and full of themselves. I mean, it was striking. So Maria says, I know you've spoken a bit during, and the reason why I'm doing this email with you, Berto, is because you have a daughter that is heading into that arena.
Oh, yes.
So, going on. I know you've spoken a bit during your Love is Blind Micah and Rita videos about mean girls. I have a stepdaughter who is almost 12, and I'd love to help guide her away from falling into that style of friendship. She lives with her mom, and the majority of the time, and she lives with her mom a majority of the time and spends weekends and long breaks with us. So, in other words, Maria's saying, I don't have a ton of influence as much as the mom does, but when I do see her, maybe there's something I can do going on. I'd like to think my husband and I do a good job modeling non-judgmental behavior. However, our oldest daughter has a strong tendency of making pretty harsh, judgmental comments that could sound pretty biting and hurtful. For example, she'll say things about girls in her school like, I can't stand this girl. She never brushes her hair and always has dark circles under her eyes. Nobody likes her. Or, everyone hates this girl because she's such a pick-me girl. Do you know
What is a pick-me girl?
So a pick-me girl is apparently an insult for young people today, including people in their 20s and 30s. That's young people to me, who is a girl who is trying to get guys to pick her, and the way that they do that is by changing their personality to be more like a dude, I think. Like they'll be like, yeah, I'm just so crazy. I just love playing video games all day and smoking pot.
Oh, okay.
And I just like to dress in a regular outfit and not wear makeup. And, I like burgers and fries. I don't know. I'm just kind of random like that. And it's this way of enticing men and girls like this might get labeled as pick-me girls. But
I'd heard the term, but I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, and it's quite an insult, apparently. Sometimes I wonder if there are just, legit girls or young women who like to eat hamburgers and play video games. I don't know, going on. While I love my stepdaughter and believe that she is a very good person inside, I can't help but be worried about how this behavior may evolve over time. I try to strike a balance of offering gentle guidance away from that behavior, and I offer advice like, you don't have to like everyone in your class, but commenting on a person's looks or calling them names isn't really respectful. I'm curious what advice you have for me in this situation. I love my stepdaughter and want to help her without making the situation worse, and I don't want to push her away in any way. It feels like my efforts fall on deaf ears, though, or doesn't make much difference. I don't want her to become a bully, though. Thank you for any feedback. Berto, what do you think?
Such a tough thing. Obviously, everyone struggles going through teenage years. It's a difficult time. But then if you have to compound that with, mean boys or mean girls or mean whoever, that's terrible. I actually didn't know of the phenomenon like until the movie came out, Mean Girls. I hadn't really thought about it, but then looking back, I always thought, yeah, well, there's mean girls, there's mean guys. There's just a type of person that maybe because of their own damage and family life at home ends up being that they want to lash out and hurt others. And it's sad. It's sad for them. It's certainly sad for the people they hurt. I've thought about this in the sense of, yeah, like how do I protect my kids? What can I do or say to help equip them for dealing with such things and to make it so that they're not mean girls? Because you always like to think you're the good guy in the story. But how do you know you're not going to be the one bullying or being mean or your child is? So one of the things is certainly watching things, reading things, and talking about things that emphasize empathy and that really put you in the shoes of other people's suffering or other people's situations. I think that that's really effective for a lot of reasons. We've talked about empathy a billion times on the podcast. But, like you'll be watching a movie and you're seeing that, oh, okay, so like if this were me, this is how I would feel. And then you're reading a book and you're going through it. But I think the most important part is having those conversations about it. There's been many times where the way that I try to correct the behavior when they do something mean to their sister or to someone else is by saying the tried and true, how would this make you feel, right? Like, what if this was you? What if this was happening to you? And it feels almost like a cheat code, like, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't it be inherently you just don't do mean things? But we are humans. We have to trick our brain a lot of times. And it feels effective to try to visualize. Imagine you're on the receiving end of what you're doing right now. Is that something you would like? And if it's not, then why do you think that they would like it? Why not try to change that? So that seems to be good. And then as far as like being on the receiving end of Mean Girls, there definitely been instances where both of my kids have had run-ins with abusive behavior. Not extreme, luckily. We've been lucky in that regard. Last year, my teen, who's now a teenager, last year was at a camp, and at this camp, it was a camp with all girls, but there was one camper who was a bully and was bullying many of the kids, including my daughter. And it got so extreme that they had to actually call the parents and have that camper removed. But it was traumatizing for, we didn't find out about it until the camp was over. That's the other thing. They didn't notify the parents. So we didn't find out until after the fact. And then I was hearing my daughter talk about it.
What was the bully doing?
It started with insults, a lot of verbal abuse, and then it sounded like...
Like what?
Using a lot of bad words that they weren't normally exposed to, like cuss words, and also sexual insults. And that was
like what?
Concerning. I don't know the exact words that they were using because, my daughter didn't want to repeat stuff. Oh. But also...
I mean, I'm just curious because of the
severity. It sounded to me like it was things like, C word, and it sounded like there might have been something about like sexual innuendo, not innuendos, like sexual insults, like
slut,
stuff like that.
Maybe. Yeah, and it was said to your daughter and to other girls.
Yeah, several campers, and
in anger. It was said in anger.
Yes, and then apparently it became physical too. Like this person started hitting someone, and it wasn't my daughter, but it was someone.
Wow.
And anyways, it was really bad, and bad enough to where the person had to be removed from the camp. Now, I feel terrible, obviously, for all the campers that were affected, but I feel terrible for that person because who knows what pain and suffering they're going through that caused this behavior, because they were the same age. They're not some adult who's already lived a gristled life. They're a kid.
Yeah. And
they were acting kind of like an antisocial deviant, but it was, it was very unexpected. So the thing that really struck me is when I was talking to my daughter about it, how shook she was, like how scared she was about the incident, and how it almost ruined her entire experience.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that you are stuck in a cabin or a camp with someone that you have no idea what they're capable of, and they've shown you what there to some extent. And even just the name calling could trigger that. You're thinking, my God, like you're unhinged.
Yeah.
And I'm sleeping away from home, especially after COVID and all that kind of stuff.
And it was the first camp. It was the first away from home camp.
Yeah, which is terrifying anyway. And then to not have your parents there to protect you, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a whole week too. It wasn't like just like 2 days or something. It was a whole week. Yeah. So that was hard. I do think that experience, in a weird way, gave her some new tools that hopefully she can keep with her. But you know, you never want to.
I suppose it's an innocence that needs to be lost, right?
And you hope that the loss doesn't come at too high a price. But yes.
Yeah. So my answer, briefly, to the question, Maria, is that as a stepmom, the best thing you can do for a lot of efforts is to have a venue of communication between you and your stepdaughter that will facilitate a lot of communication, most notably love and attachment, but also guidance. And you already are saying that you have that to some extent, but I would really focus on that. There's no best way to convince a 12-year-old about something other than if you have a strong connection. 12-year-olds will want to know what you think of their behavior. They'll be so craving what you think, and they'll be so craving your approval that unless you say something, they'll just take guesses as to what they want you to do, what you want them to do. So having a strong bond is important. It's not always easy to do as a stepmom, but it's the primary goal. And then once you have enough of that, then continuing to do what you do. Lead by example is a huge thing. And you can even highlight examples, like say something happens at work where you have an urge to participate in being mean to somebody, and then you refrain and you come home and you go just casually at the dinner table and say, there's this thing happened today, and walk through it. Maybe it'll fall on deaf ears, maybe it won't, but that's part of the whole guidance process. The other thing is that you're telling me that your 12-year-old is starting to talk shit about people. And what I'll say is 12 and 13 those years are some of the hardest years and some of the most glorious years of a human's life in our society. And it's almost universal that they're going to be fairly insecure because they're suddenly facing teenage life, which is basically a precursor to adult life. And it was not long ago that they were just a helpless 9-year-old and not expected to do anything. And even if you try to protect the 12-year-old from that forbidden fruit, they will pick up on it anyway because they look around. And with that pressure comes with it just tremendous insecurity, and they have no way of coping with it. And they're almost universally going to all go through a period where they're going to cope in some poor ways. One of the ways is to do what all of us have a tendency to do, is to compare. And by pushing other people down, then it elevates us. Plus, there's a tremendous amount of need to fit in and to be accepted by your people. And to put others down is to, at least the idea is to ensure your connection and your loyalty. You might even, as a group, bully other people as a way to define yourself, as a way to draw that boundary between the us's and the them's. When I look at my yearbooks, there's this stark contrast between the yearbook of my 7th grade and my yearbook 8th grade and beyond. The yearbook on my 7th grade, I am writing stuff in there that is insulting to other kids in school. And I am horrified. Now, I'm 99% sure that the kids in question never would have seen this because that wasn't really my style. But I was clearly participating with my friends in an activity that was, this kid is stupid, that kid's ugly, that kid's dumb, or whatever. And it was horrible. Fast forward 1 year to my next year's yearbook, and there's zero of it. There's no, it's completely gone.
Wow.
There's not a hint of it. And I marvel at that, right? I was like, wow. Like, so you look at a kid in the 7th grade that is a mean boy like me, and it's easy to generalize and say that is a mean boy. Yeah. But another way to see it is like, well, that's just a fucking 7th grader
transitioning.
And so if they have enough attachment and enough guidance and enough models to follow in you, there's a pretty good chance they'll just grow out of it anyway. You know what I mean? All right, let's take a break. When we get back, one more email. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Let's just do 10 more from this list, from the OPP list. What do you say, bro?
Let's do it.
So we have Jamie, who is from Dover, New Hampshire, who became a patron in 2022.
I didn't know there was a Dover in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Cool. And so since she's only been a patron for a couple of years, I think she's at like maybe the highest tier. And by the way, I don't want to shame people for being a lower tier, or for not even being a patron. You know, everyone has their reasons. And so when I sorted this list, I just thought, my goodness, there's this group of people. So I just thought I'd highlight them. We have Samantha from Camino Island, Washington.
Oh, wow.
We have Ethel from, where is Ethel? Oh, God knows where Ethel is from. We have Rachel from God knows where. We have Beth from Olympia, Washington. We've met Beth.
Yes.
She's been a patron since 2016. She came to one of our shows. We have Bob from God knows where. We have Seattle Trans and Non-Binary Choral Ensemble. Seattle Trans and Non-Binary Choral Ensemble. So I wonder if that's their Patreon page or something. We have Anna from God knows where. Thea from God knows where. Vicky from God knows where. Jamie from God knows where. And Nikki from Calgary, Alberta. Thank you.
Wow.
Really.
Thank you all.
You are very important to what we do here, because without you, I would have to still be working at the university full time and have a part-time practice, and I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now.
It literally made it all possible.
Yeah. All right. So one more email. Patron Taylor of Central Oregon. She says, "Dear Dr. Honda, or as I call you to my friends and family, Dr. Brain Hug." I like that. "I don't like compliments, and I am writing this to help me explore why. I wish that I liked compliments. I wish I knew how to accept them. When I get one, I think, why would someone say that to me? It's not true. And I don't feel like I deserve it. Also, I sometimes feel distrust of people complimenting me, like, what do you want from me in this moment? But I absolutely love giving comments. And yes, I am in therapy, and I have talked with my therapist about it. So, Berto, I wanted to know what you think about this, because you don't take compliments very well.
Well, it's true, but I used to be way worse, and I've been on a journey that I think has been good. I've talked about this before. When I used to play live music, I had this mix of emotions whenever the set would finish. Half of me wanted no one to talk to me, and half of me wanted people to just come rushing and being like, "Oh my God, you were the best thing ever." But then inevitably what would happen is if someone came and said, "Oh, that was pretty good," I would say something along the lines of like, "Oh, no, it was terrible. It sucked. I just made so many mistakes." And I would always do this. Well, one time this happened to me where I went up to someone and I said, "Oh my gosh, that was such a good set," or whatever it was I was complimenting about. And they did it to me like, no, it was terrible. I made so many mistakes. And I felt so bad. So, meaning so rejected. So I was like, well, does that mean I have terrible taste? Does that mean it felt so invalidating?
Yeah, it's also dismissive.
Yeah, and so I was like, wait, that's how I am? That's how people must feel. People come up like legitimately, they don't have to say anything. They could just be quiet, go on their way. They come up to me to say something nice, and I'm like, no, your taste sucks. I actually was the opposite of what you're saying. Go away, in different words. And so based on that, I started forcing myself that if someone came up and was like, that was good. That was a good set, whatever. I'd be like, oh, thank you. I just thought like, oh, thank you. And then I might elaborate. I might say like, oh yeah, today was blah, blah. But I would start with like, oh, thank you. And it was hard for me to do. There was something inherent like, I want the compliments. I want the attention. But as soon as I get it, I'm like, I'm being paid attention. This feels weird. No, stop it. And almost like I need to prepare for the worst. So by me being my harshest critic, it will protect me against someone criticizing me.
So if someone were to compliment you at a different moment, like at dinner, and they're saying something like you're smart or you're a good person or you're thoughtful or they like your outfit, you also, in my experience, don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't shut it down the way that you're describing.
Right.
But you're not like, oh, thanks. That's nice of you to
Right,
say.
because it's a little less charged. The music had so much writing on it for me in that moment that it was like the pinnacle of that situation being, I put all this effort, I did this thing, I want all the recognition, but then all my psychology is going to burst out whenever I get a compliment. Whereas if it's more casual, where at dinner someone's like, oh, that's a really nice t-shirt or something, I'll still have that inclination of dismiss it, put yourself down, do something to get out of this situation, but the stakes won't be as high. Nowadays, whenever someone compliments a t-shirt I wear, first of all, and this isn't even a lie, most often the t-shirts I wear that get compliments were a gift from my mom. So that's what I usually go to. It's like, oh yeah, my mom got me this t-shirt. And it's a nice way to like say yes, and another thing to talk about. This was from my mom, and I even add sometimes, all my best t-shirts are from my mom. It's a way for me to like acknowledge it without basking in it, I guess, which is like my latest thing. But that's with t-shirts. There's other things where you've experienced, like in this podcast, where you'll give me a compliment, and I'm like, no, like I try to play it down or move on. Let's move on from the conversation. It does make me uncomfortable.
What is it? What do you think it is? What are possible roots? Because I bet you Taylor and you have similar roots.
Okay, so just free association, some things that come to mind. One, my dad would compliment me heavily. Like, he would be like, I'd show him a painting or something and like, oh my God, you're so good. This is so good. Or I would do well on a test. I'm like, oh man, it's so great. Like basically he would be my biggest cheerleader. And so on the one hand, that's good. That gave me some of my narcissism, some of my like, or put it a different way, that gave me some of my ability to be self-assured. That said, it also kind of set up this odd system where this person who I have a very complicated relationship with is the person saying that I'm great. And now I have mixed feelings about how I feel about their opinion of things. And also coupled with that, does that mean that I need to be the greatest of all time in order for this person to still be proud of me? Like there's all those things, right?
And I would point out that I would not conceptualize as being a function of him complimenting you, but a function of other issues that would happen between you and your dad and you and your mom.
Right.
That if those things hadn't happened, you wouldn't have that asterisk around the compliment. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Because I don't want to send a message to parents out there that they should refrain from complimenting their kids.
Yeah. But now, if I were to put my finger on probably the most likely answer, it might actually be my mom, because she would not compliment me. She would put me down in instances. And that hurt, like for example, I would be like, this one will always stick in my mind, right? I'm practicing piano in my house. I'm probably 16 years old or something. Practicing piano, singing. I'm singing and practicing piano.
Well, you turn down that goddamn racket.
Right. Except that what comes down from upstairs is,
wasn't it something racket?
Well, you stop that infernal sound. Yeah, something like it was.
Infernal.
It was like something about it being terrible. Right now, as a parent, can I now relate to the idea of like, can we have some peace and quiet in the house for a little bit? I can, but I would never say that to my child.
Well, if your child was just arbitrarily banging pots and pans,
absolutely.
But if your child was, say, like your
Practicing
little one would be practicing a Taylor Swift routine,
right?
You wouldn't walk in and you would take care, and probably just endure it, right?
Right. And that wasn't the only instance. There were these things, and I think,
or even celebrate it, I guess.
Right.
Actually,
there were these things where part of it was maybe not that instance, but there were things where when she saw me getting older, she started seeing my dad, and it triggered her. Like when we would get in arguments, she would. I realized this, that she would immediately get triggered as if she was having an argument with my father. And so then what would happen is, I think she would lob insults at me because she would be projecting that stuff that she would have wanted to say to my dad or something like that.
So how does that relate to compliments today?
Well, that's the thing, is like, I feel like when I get a compliment, I might have to, there's part of my brain that might have to be like, that's not right. Aren't you supposed to be insulting me? Because, what was the thing that mattered the most to me in my life was my mom, right? Like that was, your mother is so important. And so it might be, and again, I'm just kind of like thinking out loud, but it might be that in that moment, there's like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel comfortable.
Right. So that's one conceptualization. I hadn't thought of that, but that fits within a category, and it is often accompanied by another aspect of this. So on one hand, it's uncomfortable because you're unfamiliar with it. But, not being familiar with something isn't always rejected or pushed back against, right, by us. But another maybe contributory factor is often, and you can try this on for size, is that, what we long for, compliments, and clearly everyone does, but maybe you more than others, right? Particularly from your mom. I'll break this into two different categories. One, if I were to say to you something complimentary, something that you really cared about, it can cause the pain to emerge strangely, because you're now, the analogy I have is that, my mom had a daycare, and when the kids would be in a phase where they would really miss their parents, I would watch them. Eventually, by the end of the day, they'd be playing contently, and sometimes I'd see their parents walk in the front door, and the kid wouldn't see the parents, and the kid's just like doopy doopy doo, and then all of a sudden they're aware of their parents, and they would burst into tears. And the analogy is that you're in pain, but you've managed to suppress it and sort of forget it for a bit. But once you are in contact with the thing that you were desiring, you both enjoy it, but it also causes you to acknowledge the fact that you haven't been getting it. And and the pain can overwhelm any minor enjoyment that you have. And so you instantly have this discomfort feeling of just like, I don't like this feeling. Why are you triggering my trauma right now with this compliment?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay,
Another
that
part
makes,
of, but try that on the other side.
That makes a lot of sense, because now the more I think about it, one of the things that happened when I moved up here at 15, I had this transition from being with I traded a parent who was dysfunctional in their operating within the real world. They couldn't maintain a job. We had no money. It was, things were heading really badly. But paid a lot of attention to me and was very supportive of me and would always listen to me and would always compliment me, right? And then
like your grandparents in Colombia and your dad, that's your time, and your aunts.
Yeah,
and
specifically my dad. I traded that for a parent who was very organized, who had structure, who had security and safety and and all that stuff, but
and didn't exploit you
exactly.
Directly. Yeah,
but didn't pay attention to me and didn't compliment me, right? And of course, at that age, you don't even think about it, just like. But the reality is that it was an literally overnight transition from that.
Yeah.
It was ripping off this man. And so now all of a sudden, I don't realize...
As highlighted by the fact that on your first day of school, which I think was soon after arrival for you, you were not assisted on the way home such that you didn't know how to get home. Because of course you didn't know how to get home. You don't and after learning where you live finally, after being supposedly a good friend of yours for a couple of decades, I was finally allowed to come to your mom, your childhood home. You live in a windy road neighborhood where it's unclear. You can't just say go down First Avenue and take a left on Cedar Street. It's like, well, you kind of have to find that one windy road, then you have to look for this one house and da-da-da. Anyway.
Once you're in the thick of that neighborhood, it all looks the same. If you've never been there, it is a maze. You're like, oh, I think it's, maybe it's that, wait.
I mean, who does that? It's like you're 15, you're a child, you're barely older than your daughter, and you just send them off to school and figure, well, they'll find their way home maybe.
Right.
And didn't you have to take a crap in someone else's house?
Yeah. It was a really bad afternoon because
you had to bang on a stranger's house and can I take a poop at your house?
That's exactly what happened. I missed the drop-off point. Then I got off in the place that it looked like where I needed to get off. The bus driver has no idea who I am or where I'm supposed to get off, so I just get off. I'm looking around. I'm like, I think I recognize this. I walk forever. I need to go to the bathroom. I'm now getting desperate. It's getting later. So I finally find this house, knock, and this gorgeous girl my age opens the door, and I'm like, can I use your bathroom? So embarrassing. But anyways, so yeah.
Hence your fetish now.
Hence my fetish, yeah. So, but this was the problem, is that I went, and at the time I didn't realize what I had just lost, right? So it is very possible, to use your model, that what happens when someone pays me a compliment is in that instant, I get two things. Oh, my dad's back. He's once again acknowledging me. Wait, that's gone missing. And now, it's replaced with this. But I love this side and I love this side. And it's so complex and conflicted.
Interesting.
Get away from me.
Yeah.
Stop it.
I don't want to think about this right now.
It's painful.
I don't want to feel this right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And also the acknowledgement, specifically when it came to the music stuff, was... Because, if you say, ooh, Berto, you're smart. I don't say, no, Kirk, I'm stupid, right? I don't contradict you 100%. But with the music, it was kind of like that, where, hey, that was a good set. No, it was terrible. I made so many, it's literally contradicting the person's compliment.
This gets at, you said this earlier, my last point, which is that if we can control the whip, we're going to get whipped.
Right.
Well, if I can whip myself, even if it's just as hard as the other person's going to whip me, at least I know when the whipping is going to occur.
That's right.
And I can also demonstrate to everyone, you don't have to whip me. I'll do it myself.
It's like in Shogun. the guy, did you watch Shogun?
Oh, yeah, I love that show.
Just finished it
Watched
last
it twice, actually.
Oh my gosh. So, no spoilers, but in I think the very first episode, when the one guy falls down to try to rescue the other dude, and he's thinking that the waves are going to get him, and he's like, fine, I'll just take matters into my own hands, and he was about to kill himself with a sword.
Right.
It's that kind of thing, I won't let the world do this to me. I'll do this to me.
Right, because if you can control it, it feels a little better. You feel more in control of your destiny. But also, it's just really horrible to wait for the other shoe to drop when you know the other shoe is going to drop. It's better just to get it over with,
Right.
So if for compliments, or you're in the crucible of being evaluated and you're desperate for compliments,
right.
There's a part of you that's just like, look, we both know you're not going to get a compliment. In fact, you're going to be shit on. You might as well just get out ahead of it and do it yourself, and do it loudly so people can be let off the hook. They don't have to, wage the criticism on you, and you can demonstrate to others that And it's also a little self-aggrandizing in a weird way of like, look, everyone, I understand that I'm terrible and I strive to be better. So it's a lot of things all at once.
Yeah.
Is the point.
Well, in a weird way, it is because there was that aspect as well. It's like, no. You don't even know what you're saying because like, actually, I'm great.
Right.
And the fact that I'm not great right this second is not my fault. And you don't realize it. And it's like this weird, like lashing out in that moment.
Right.
But the poor person was just trying to say, hey, good job.
Yeah. And I would say 100% of people have a good dose of this.
Sure.
And a smaller percentage of people have a massive dose of it. So it's a pretty universal thing. And we also have a culture, an element, and you could say women and other oppressed groups might particularly have a dose of this societally, in that it's considered to be unseemly and narcissistic maybe, or immature or something, to think highly of yourself, when our society is completely based on doing things of merit, when we're given a compliment, if a woman being told that she needs to stay in her place and that she doesn't have merit in the workplace or something, and she's complimented, and again, particularly for women, because they're given a mandate of they have to serve other people, and to accept a compliment in that moment means they're not technically serving others. They're not they're fine with complimenting because that's their mandate, but to accept a compliment is inherently this horrific, selfish act. So there's a lot of different messages that we absorb that make it very difficult for us to take compliments. But a major function of happiness and healing and just getting through the fucking day is absorbing compliments as they come and giving compliments when they occur to you. So much of our life is hinged on approval of other people, and that is normal and healthy. And to give and receive compliments is the fuel that keeps us going, and to deny us that is a crime. And the fact that we have traumas in society that prevents us from doing that, results in the things that we see in our society.
Yeah. Well, look, I've had this conversation with my 13-year-old because when, I used to...
You sat her down and you're like, Daddy needs way more compliments, honey.
Yeah, exactly. No, well, I've always complimented her when she does art, for example, right? So she'll do this painting and I'm like, oh, that is so amazing. And for a while, she was starting to do the same thing, which is interesting because she doesn't have the same trauma and all these things, but she was doing the same thing. So maybe this points to a personality thing, where she would say,
or a female thing,
could be right, where she would say, "Oh no, it's terrible. It's terrible." And I actually told her, I'm like, so listen, I actually think it's a good thing for you to be a good critic of yourself so you get better, because I told her I actually wasn't a good enough critic of my own stuff for a long time. And it doesn't help me get better. So that's good. However, it's also good to be able to receive a compliment and be okay that that you can improve on whatever it is that you did. So I've had that conversation a few times to be able to see that, yes, it's fine. Because the message I don't want to send...
What message did you... This is interesting. What message did you give to convince her that accepting and maybe basking for a couple seconds in the compliment is a good thing?
Well, I don't know if this is sunk in, but what I've asked her to do, basically as a parent tells a kid, do this because I'm your parent, is listen, when someone gives you a compliment, first and foremost, thank them.
Yeah, out of politeness at the very least.
Yeah, and then, but what I did leave room for, and I said, listen, I'm not saying that whenever you draw something, it's always perfect and you need to believe it's perfect, and if someone says that, that's not what I'm saying. You can have any criticisms you want about the things you draw, and you can accept criticism. But when someone just pays you a compliment, even if you think they're wrong, start by thanking them. and that's me basically trying to give
that's good. That's
that
good.
tool.
I would add this.
Yeah.
I would add two other things. One is that there's a parallel process when it comes to art that on one hand, if you have a drive to improve, everything that you make is going to have its flaws or its learning curve or whatever that you plan on improving on in the future.
Yep.
At the same time, it's also a beautiful piece of work that I guess on some arbitrary metric, you will create something better in the future, or there are other pieces of art in the world that are, technically better or something given arbitrary metrics or something. But regardless of a particular quote unquote flaw or you could improve on in the future, this thing that you made is inherently a beautiful thing and in a way flawless, because art is art and you made it. And regardless of what anyone else thinks, you should be able to see your art in that light of, this is beautiful. And in the moment where I'm not thinking about the future, I could do that later, but right now, this is amazing. I'm going to celebrate the fact that I made this thing and someone else enjoys it. That's one thing. The second thing is, you as a father, when you look at her painting, and I've seen them too, they have like drastically improved. I mean, she wasn't terrible before, but she's getting better and better. Like, it's weird to see that progression. But you as a father, when you look at her painting, you legit enjoy it and you don't see any flaws.
Right.
You're not lying to her.
No.
You're not shining sunshine up her ass.
I'm legitimately impressed. Now,
you like it.
Yeah.
So when you are saying from the heart and a truthful statement of, this is a legit painting and I like it, that she needs to, even if she's like, I don't know, for a part of herself to heal and to progress and to function and to be healthy, a part of her needs to be able to at least have the self-regard and the awareness and the reality that someone else enjoys this thing. Right. And that is it's uncorrupted by my perfectionism. They enjoy it. Right. And yes, I would like to improve, but right now I'm going to focus on the here and now. He enjoys this painting, and I made this painting in part to hear what my dad thought of that. Right. And right now, I'm not going to I want to improve this or this flaw. I'm not going to let that get in the way of this pure moment. I think those are important messages.
Absolutely. And, as always, the thing that actually helped her start seeing it from the other side is, guess what? When she tried to start giving compliments to her younger sister, and her younger sister would do the same thing to her, and she's like, oh, okay. I mean, we learn from experience, right?
Yeah, so, but my point is that there's politeness, which of course is important.
Yeah.
But the internal experience, which honestly you might not have a good version of for yourself because of your issues that we've talked about. And yes, just yesterday, Berto, somehow Stacy and I were talking about, or Stacy brought up that Billy Joel, piano album that you're coming out. I say Billy Joel because just that style of music. Right. And I was reminded that you had a lot. So you started it 10 years ago, and were planning on releasing this CD and had all the songs recorded in the studio and and you just needed to kind of clean them up. The last 10 or 15% was yet to be done. And then some perfectionism got in the way. And then I would bug you periodically on the podcast. And then you finally, like a year ago, decided to pursue it again. And you had all this energy around it. You had, in my view, completed at least a few songs, maybe a little bit of tweaking here and there. And then when Stacy brought that up yesterday, I was like, oh no, is it happening? Because I haven't heard you talk about it for the past 6 months or something. So I say all this because the message that I'm telling you to give your daughters around this, around like live in the moment and understand that, yes, fine, you can always be striving to improve, but there's this parallel process of you should really try to understand and absorb and see your creations as inherently good, end of sentence, to yourself and other people. When they see that and like it, believe it and absorb it, for later on, you can certainly think about how you would like to improve it. That's fine. But that shouldn't be the dominant foundation to your experience with art. It ruins art and makes it so that you have 11 years in and out of various studios, having never completed a CD that the listeners desperately want to hear.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, the other thing that happened was when I first started playing out, I had fun, and then it quickly became almost like this adversarial relationship between me and an audience, where I was like, oh, I have to prove myself, And so on top of everything else,
like I'll show them or something.
Yeah, kind of. So on top of everything else, I would have like this this is before you met me, in previous versions of my band. But it's funny, like I said, when I first started playing, I had a joy of the V, like I had fun with it, and we had fun shows and things. But then it started becoming more serious for me, and then I put a lot of stakes on it, and then I would get in my head, and my songs that I started writing were harder to sing, and so it was like this, I'll show the world, I'll show them, and I was not really enjoying the show, and so by the time I was done, I just want to get out of there, but I want to hear that I was great, but I know I didn't do great, and then the few nice enough souls that would still come up, and they also got a mouthful from me that they weren't expecting. So one of the things that did evolve, by the time I started playing with you, although I was still nervous and all these things, I started having more fun again. And by the time I was playing in Plastic Polly with Eric and Paul, I was having a lot of fun. So that's why even when we played to an empty room, except for you, I was still having fun playing, And so there was also that. There was kind of and I think it was my age too. So on top of everything else, it made it that much worse because I was at a stage where I was like, everything is riding on these performances.
So conveying that idea to your daughter, your daughters, I think would be helpful. Not just politeness, right?
Yeah, totally.
All right, well, that does it for that episode. I want to compliment you, Berto, on being the best co-host in the entire world.
Oof. I don't know. Maybe in this episode of the podcast.
But you seriously are.
Thank you.
You seriously are. I have other co-hosts who are also fantastic, but for these kinds of conversations, you're off the cuff, you're smart, you always have something interesting to say, you are vulnerable. I have noticed that when the listeners compliment you and I talk about them, you do accept that. I'm remembering that.
Well, but again, this is after years of working on that. So, but
do you really feel it? Do you believe it?
Yeah, no, I do. And I guess maybe coming from the listeners, I feel an extra responsibility of they don't have to say anything. The fact that they would take time to write something nice, I feel I definitely owe something, like a thank you or like an acknowledgement of some sort, that those are not wasted words. And like I said, I now see it from the other side of, what am I like if I disagree, am I basically saying that they have terrible taste? Like, it's kind of a different way to state what you were saying, is like, no matter what, my art, if you call this art, has given them enjoyment, and that in itself is beautiful.
Do you believe that you're a good co-host?
I do believe it. That I do believe, because
good.
I mean, I look back and I think I would have been weeded out way the hell sooner if I couldn't have been a good co-host.
Yeah. I was just hanging out with Lita last night, actually. We didn't weed her out.
How's she doing? No.
But she moved away from Seattle, so she stopped being a co-host. But she's good, yeah.
She's very like me, like we had that's why we got along great.
Yeah.
We improvised quite well.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology Seattle. Everyone out there, give and receive compliments and take care of yourself because
You deserve it.